Hi everyone. So in the first part of this how-to, we went through and separated the panels off the main body of the car. And now what I thought I'd take you through is some effects on the actual bodywork before we go to paint. And what I want to try and achieve, here's the one I prepared earlier, is a textured finish with some holes drilled out, and I'll show you how I've done that, to try and simulate some rust holes and some bubbling under the paint. And as we go to paint, I'll show you exactly how I do that. So first thing I do is, and everything's going to be very, very basic, there's nothing super advanced with what I'm showing you, is just with a pen marking out where I think the rust would be. Okay, and this is, you can Google your particular model car and see where do they typically rust on real cars, and start to make those out. So here's a few examples. This is another panel, so the front quarter panel, I've already gone and marked that. So they typically rust around here, and it's quite a nice effect when you lose part of a body as well. To rust and decay, so I'm going to cut that piece out as well. I'll have to see how I can integrate that with the front bumper, but I'll get to that later. So I'll leave that up here slightly in view, but this is a panel that I went and already started drilling the holes out of. So just with your hobby drill, and the tip size doesn't really matter because you'll manipulate the holes anyway, is go through and start your hole by hand. Be careful how you handle the panel, and don't start being too rough and snapping things off, because that becomes a bigger headache. So I've got a hole there. Right. And what I might do is put a second one just next to it, not too far away. Okay, and then what I'll start to do, I'll get my hobby knife, is I'll try and bridge those two holes now, so it's one wide hole. Not a big deal if it becomes too big, because we can go and fix it up later on when we apply the putty. Okay. What we do want is just to add some realism and some depth, is when we go and add that putty later on onto the top, the holes actually go all the way through the panel, so it just gives it a bit of realism. Yeah, so you can see I've opened that hole up a little bit more, and then what I can do is rough that area a little bit more with my file. Doesn't really matter if I get rid of my texture now anyway. I'm working on the panel, so I kind of know exactly where, or more or less what I want to do with it. Doesn't need to be exact. That's the beauty of weathering. Doesn't really need to be exact. You can make mistakes and it just looks fine. So that's one of the holes. Now, as I said, this is a panel where I've made a few holes already. So I've made holes, manipulated the shape, and then just with my hobby knife you can see I've taken some angled cuts around, and a little bit of a circular motion when I do that, so something like that. So dig that blade in, turn it around, just keep shaving off lengthwise. So I've made a few holes. So the next thing I do is, to get it to this stage, is really just using Tamiya putty. Basic type is what I've got. It's the only one I've got. There's probably multiple types, but this one works fine. And only thing you've really got to remember is you're going to do exactly what you wouldn't do normally with the putty. You don't want to make it smooth. and you don't want to make it even. So what I do is, I'll move this panel out of the way, get a little bit out, and just where I've made my holes or my rough patches, or where my black patches of texture were, I'll go and dab. Just a thin coat in most areas. Some areas you can go a little bit heavier if that's the effect you want. And you can see I've covered the hole that I've drilled. I've done that intentionally, but I'm doing it as though it's a mistake for now, just for the purposes of explanation. Bit more dabbing. Okay, there. Quite rough, looks terrible, which is perfect. Toothpick, could be anything, skewer stick, whatever. And you can see there's a hole there, and what I'll do is I'll start to, because it's self-leveling, it'll start to smoothen out already, and then what I'll do is I'll just aggravate the texture a little bit, and just to get my holes back, let me just wipe the tip of the toothpick. So I'll just come back through from the back side. It's opened up my holes a little bit more, and now I can manipulate the shape of those holes a little bit and start to make it look like a panel that's seen better days. Yeah, do that also to the back one, so that's a much better example of how it started to smooth out. And smooth is not what we want rusty. So once we paint over it, we may sand it, we may just paint it a rust color, let's see, but it's going to look rough. Right, that's what we want. Okay, so that's this door here. Probably did about, still slightly soft, so probably did that about 30 minutes ago. So you can see it's not really set smooth, it's set a little bit more of a rough texture, rough surface. So that's what we're going to go with. So I'll apply that to the rest of the panels, and then the next video on the how-tos, well, more than likely we'll go to paint. Okay, enjoy.